Hello and welcome to another episode of the Smart Freight Center Academy podcast, where we share interesting and important information and updates about freight decarbonization and the drive towards a zero emissions logistics industry. My name is Andy Golding. I'm the head of Academy here at Smart Freight Center, or SFC, as you'll hear us call it, and I'm your host for today. Today's topic is, of course, an important one, and it is one of the aspects of freight decarbonization that I think the average consumer or the average person is most likely to see obviously reflected in their day-to-day lives. I'm talking about fleet electrification or electric vehicles. You've probably started to notice a lot more electric vehicles or EVs on the roads recently, whether they're personal cars or electric delivery vehicles. In this series of 3 shortcasts, we'll be talking about road freight electrification and the work that Smart Freight Center is doing regarding RFE, or road freight electrification. We'll start by getting an understanding of what road freight electrification is in episode 1. That's this episode. Then in episode 2, we're going to look at Smart Freight Center's focus on road freight electrification. And finally, in episode 3, we're going to talk about the role and importance of education in road freight electrification. For this series, I'm going to be joined by my incredibly smart and very witty colleague, Tharsis Teoh. And if you're lucky, Tharsis might just drop in a few of his terrifically cheesy jokes along the way. So, without further ado, let's drive into episode 1, Understanding Road Freight Electrification. Tharsis, it's awesome to have you with us here today. Can you tell us a little bit about who you are and your role here at SFC?
Thanks, Andy. I will try not to drop any jokes today. I'll try to be professional. My name is Tharsis Teoh. I'm a senior technical manager at Smart Freight Center. I focus primarily on road freight electrification now. Although when I started maybe about 2 years ago, I was working on the use of biofuels in road freight. And my mission actually is just to simplify the adoption of electric freight vehicles in the logistics sector, supporting shippers and carriers to find their place in the electrification journey and to just make it simpler for them.
Love that. Your mission is to simplify the adoption of electric freight vehicles. I love that. It's simple, it's clear, it matters. Tharsis, let's start right away then. I'm diving straight into my first question for you, which is, what does road freight electrification actually mean?
That's a good place to start. Let's bring it back. First, let's talk about what an electric freight vehicle is, because that's the main focus. Electric freight vehicle is a fit-for-purpose commercial vehicle used to transport goods, used in the logistics sector, but it's propelled by electricity. So in contrast to what you commonly see on the road, which are most likely diesel trucks, these diesel trucks are internal combustion vehicles, and they are powered by mostly fossil fuels. The challenge with that is that the burning of fossil fuels is a major cause of carbon emissions, which is obviously a challenge when we are trying to reduce our impact on climate change. And the transition is necessary. Now, we need to transition away from using fossil fuels wherever possible. The current road freight sector actually uses about 96% reliance on fossil fuels. And we need to move away from that. And electric freight vehicles are a good long-term solution to do that. And so what road freight electrification is actually that transition. So we're thinking about what we have as a current system, reliance on fossil fuels, reliance on an internal combustion engine. And we're trying to move away from reliance on all of that and reliance on that support system, the fossil fuels supply system, moving towards enabling electric freight vehicles to operate in road operations.
Did I hear you correctly that you just said that the traditional trucking industry, or road freight rather, is using 96%, is responsible for 96% of fossil fuel emissions?
No, it's more like the 96% of the energy use in the road freight sector comes from fossil fuels.
Aha. Thank you for clarifying. 96% of the energy used in the road freight sector comes from fossil fuels. So immediately we start to see that if we can start removing some of the reliance on those fossil fuels and shifting it over to electric vehicles, the demand drops hugely and meaningfully very fast.
Yeah. And the good thing about electric freight vehicles is that you're decoupling the vehicle and the propulsion energy needed in the vehicle from combustion. So you can actually rely on different types of energy sources. If your particular location or country has a lot of solar power, it's a good renewable energy source, you can use that. If your location has hydropower, you can use that. If your location has wind turbines, you can use that. So it's very flexible in the types of energy generation methods that it can use.
What an incredible benefit of road freight electrification that you can benefit from using the energy that is most readily available in your region. I wasn't aware of that, and that makes a lot of sense. So I think we've covered a little bit of it, but I still want to ask, in layman's terms, how is road freight electrification different to traditional trucking?
Yeah, so maybe let me answer it this way. Currently, we have a diesel truck-based operations, and the diesel truck is supported by a fuel supply system, fuel stations, and different types of alternative ways to get fuel into the truck. And if you're replacing that with an electric truck, you also have to take into account the different support systems that need to be replaced. The big term that you often hear is the charging infrastructure. So the first big difference is that electric freight vehicles or e-trucking relies on a new type of energy system or energy supply system, charging infrastructure. That does make the operations a bit more complex, because right now we're fully reliant on diesel trucks, we're fully reliant on fossil fuels. Everything is easy if you are reliant on fossil fuels. But as soon as you need to change that system, you have to rethink how everything is built. Sometimes you have to adapt. Sometimes you have to just dig everything up and replace it with a totally new system. So that's one of the big changes. But of course, the benefits is enormous, right? We'll probably get into that a bit more. But we benefit, the logistics sector will benefit from a tremendous emissions reduction. It does come with other challenges. And if we want to get into that, we can also get into that.
I'm sure that we will get into a lot of that, but it's understandable that, the traditional trucking industry, the diesel-based trucking industry, is incumbent, what the world has known for a very long time. And that's what our worldwide infrastructure is generally geared to, supporting the traditional trucking industry. And there's a lot of industrial change required to make this change feasible and sustainable and implementable at a global enough scale to really impact climate change and to really have a positive impact on the planet. Why is Smart Freight Center involved in this work?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'll give two reasons. One is we generally think that electric vehicles is the best long-term strategy for road freight decarbonization. And as you know, Smart Freight Center's mission is just to reduce absolute emissions in the logistics sector globally. And electric vehicles have that potential. We investigated the role of biofuels a couple of years ago through a series of studies in a project called the Low Emission Fuels and Vehicles Project. And basically trying to understand what is the potential for biofuels in the road freight sector. What are the challenges there? What do we need to watch out for? And it brings me to the second question. The implementation of biofuels is relatively straightforward because you're actually just using the same vehicle. The only thing that changes is the type of fuel. in the use of electric vehicles, like I mentioned, there's just a lot of things that need to be reshaped and modified, adapted, totally destroyed and replaced. So SFC's role here, I think, is because we understand the complexity of the task, we understand the benefit of the switch. We want to play that role in ensuring that the logistics sector can seamlessly transition to using electric trucks, electric vehicles wherever possible. We understand that it's also a global challenge. So I think most of our effort currently focuses in the US and in the EU. We are taking it global. So we're looking at China, we're looking at India, we're looking at how to change the system there, starting from the technology, from the operations, and also up to policy. So we're heavily invested in this, and primarily because we think it's super beneficial. And we also think that is a sufficiently complex task that we're excited to challenge.
There's clearly a lot of important work that needs to happen. There's a lot of important benefits that can come from this work. Before we wrap up for episode 1 of this 3-part series, we've spoken a bit about the detrimental effect of the traditional trucking industry. But to end on a high note, what are some of the benefits and advantages that road freight electrification and EVs will bring us?
So the benefit of electric freight vehicles is primarily the emissions reduction that you can get, greenhouse gas emissions reduction. And I mean, climate change is one of the biggest challenges that our generation is facing at this point. So, any single solution that can support in this challenge is really helpful. But put it into perspective, electric freight vehicles can reduce logistics operational emissions by up to 85% in countries with low carbon electricity. And that's tremendous. Even on average, you can reduce at least 30 to 40% of your operational emissions. And if you, as an operator, can integrate your own renewable energy source, such as solar power on your roofs, you can get that down to 90 to 100% emissions reduction. But that's not all. Since the electric freight vehicle does not have any combustion where the vehicle is, there are also benefits in terms of air quality. And air quality, as we know, is tied to health benefits. Particularly, if we have good air quality, you can avoid a lot of respiratory diseases that are pretty challenging in many parts of the world, especially in urban areas. Besides that, maybe this is a bit more of a complex answer, but because it's relying on electricity, we could reduce the volatility in the cost of the transport operation. And we could also reduce the cost of the transport operation, since on the most part, electricity is much cheaper than fossil fuels, diesel fuels, and much cheaper than biofuels. So there will be benefits in terms of reducing total cost of ownership of electric freight operations. And I think where we see those benefits, that's where we see the transition already happening.
Amazing. So up to 85% GHG emissions reduction, option to use your own energy to kind of create a fully self-sustaining grid in a way, and the air quality improvements from having zero combustion happening with those engines wherever those trucks are driving. Tharsis, there are so many questions, so many more questions, so much more information to share, and that is why we're going to have episodes 2 and 3 of this. To those of you listening, thank you for tuning in. Don't stay tuned, but come back definitely for episode 2. Our second episode in this series is going to focus on electric vehicles themselves. How do EVs compare to alternative fuels? The benefits of them? Where do they fit into global transportation trends? Make sure to join us for episodes 2 and 3. Thanks for listening.